usually I don't have a hard time talking in front of people who I don't know, but unfortunately fortunately I've been here long enough that now I'm nervous because I'm getting to know you all. So thank you for being here. The title of my presentation is I Was a Trans Kid. As some of you know, I was a lifelong Democrat. This is me for the 2016 election, marching with the Cash Dems. I was a delegate for Bernie Sanders in the last presidential election. And as you can see, things have changed. In first grade, my mom and my teacher, the school psychologist, and the principal met because my teacher was deeply concerned about my behavior. And this was the letter that my mom sent to my dad. And basically, the school psychologist said, Erin wants to be a boy. And this is a picture of me. I did everything I could to present as a boy. I wore my brother's hand-me-downs. I practiced peeing standing up. I became incredibly aggressive and somewhat violent, actually bullying, so that I could be a boy. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what a trans kid is, because at the time I did not consider myself a trans kid. But based on the definition of what is called a trans kid now, I most definitely was a trans kid. Their definition is someone who is insistent, persistent, and consistent in their belief that they are the opposite gender. When we talk about insistent, we're not talking about someone who is saying over and over and over again for years and years and years and years into adulthood that they are the opposite gender. We're talking about a kid who says, I'm a boy because I like to play baseball, or I'm a girl because I like flowers. So simple things like that defining what gender is. When they talk about persistent, again, it's a kid who might say a few times, I'd rather play with the girls than the boys because I like being with the girls. And when we talk about consistent, we're talking about not over years and years, as I was saying, but maybe a week or two or even a couple of months. And then that's all that the trans rights activists are saying is needed for a child to be considered a trans child. So according to their definition, I most definitely was a trans child because it was so significant that my school teacher called in the school psychologist to assess me. It was so significant that they had a meeting with my mother and the principal to try and figure out how to help me because it was clear that I was in distress. So the psychologist's recommendations to my mother and my teacher were pretty basic. Reinforce positive ideas about what it is to be a woman. Expose me to strong and talented women so I felt good about being female. Putting me in a special group of kids with communication issues to help me learn to communicate more effectively. Putting me in brownies and Girl Scouts, activities where I'd be around other girls and feel good about being a girl. Discouraging me from wearing my brother's clothes. Growing my hair out and encouraging me to dress feminine. And again, this wasn't make her do this. This was simple, soft encouragement. All of these would now be illegal. Every single one of those would be illegal if the Equality Act is passed. In many states, these things are already illegal, and in my state of Utah, they're trying to make these things illegal. These very simple things that children can do to help alleviate their gender dysphoria will be illegal. So what is gender dysphoria? The trans activists talk about being a trans kid, but I want to talk about what gender dysphoria is, which is the psychiatric condition that causes someone to be uncomfortable with their gender. It's a desire to be of the opposite gender, the desire to wear the clothes of the opposite gender, have playmates of the opposite gender, do the toys and activities of the opposite gender, and this is the big one, a strong dislike of their anatomy. So basically, this is, at least for me and for every other person I've talked to who had gender dysphoria, the crux of this is a strong dislike of our anatomy and a desire to change it. And all these other things are ways for us to show the community, our society, our parents, that we are the other gender. So Maria touched on this a little bit, but I want to go over the causes of gender dysphoria because people talk about gender dysphoria and being trans as being innate, and it is not. First of all, sexual assault is highly correlated with gender dysphoria. This is what happened to me. Unbeknownst to my teacher and my principal, I had been sexually assaulted the summer before first grade. It never occurred to my mother that the sexual assault that occurred was causing my gender dysphoria. There are homophobic parents who fear that their child is gay, and rather than working with a gay child, they encourage that child to present as the opposite gender because they're homophobic and they're uncomfortable with their child being gay. Parents prefer the opposite gender, and in all honesty, my stepfather delighted in me presenting as a boy. He wanted a son who could go rifle shooting with him. He wanted a son to help with tasks around the house and follow him around when he was lawn mowing. He delighted in me presenting as a boy because then I was doing all the fun things that he always thought a son would do with him. Autism is huge. There's a gender clinic in Canada and a doctor who's worked with people with gender dysphoria, children with gender dysphoria for decades, and she has found that the majority of children who come in there are on the autism spectrum. And this makes sense because kids who are on the autism spectrum take things very literally. So they think, well, if I dress like a girl, I'm a girl. And that's a very concrete way of thinking, and that's what happens when you're on the autism spectrum. Many of them are just gender nonconforming. They're what would be called tomboys decades ago. They've also found that it's a social contagion. There's a Dr. Lisa Lippman who's done a lot of research about this and shown that if one girl develops gender dysphoria and starts presenting as a boy in a school, her friends will likely follow her. And finally, puberty. We actually have transgender activists who are telling girls that if they're uncomfortable with their periods, they're actually a boy. One of my kind of questions, I always wonder if there's a window for gender, and I missed it. Because even now, I struggle a bit, and people always talk about how women love shoes. And I love shoes, as you can see. So probably the hardest part of me giving presentations like this is figuring out how to dress, because I've kind of come up with a uniform that I wear every day. I have 10 of the same shirts. I have 2 or 3 skirts. I wear leggings and these shoes every day, except for when I have to present, and then I have to try and figure out how to do it. So one of the things that worries me is that we're telling kids that their gender is based on very external things, like how they dress. And so if a child is more comfortable dressing like a boy, they're going to be told they're a boy. If a child is more comfortable dressing like a girl, they're going to be told they're a girl. And we all know that's not true. So a lot of the transgender activists suggest we should just simply let children socially transition. What's the harm? And if they turn out not to be trans, it's okay. They can just go back to their other gender. So this is how I got involved with this, because I became so concerned. Because the fact is that it's not that simple. It's not like you can just go back. There are some issues that arise as a result of transitioning. One of which is that almost 90 to 100% of people who have gender dysphoria will have that gender dysphoria naturally resolve during puberty. If they're encouraged to socially transition, they're more likely to medically transition. If they medically transition, they're 100% likely to remain trans. So they say that transitioning is reversible. And what I want to talk about is the fact that transitioning encourages a child to believe there is something wrong with their body. So it reinforces that sense that there's something wrong with their body rather than helping them resolve that feeling. Transitioning is an ineffective treatment for gender dysphoria. People who transition still experience dysphoria, and they keep trying harder and harder and harder to become something they're not, and they become more and more agitated with that. If you go on groups that are set up for transgender people, they're going to have constantly questions like, how do I resolve my voice dysphoria? My voice doesn't sound right. How do I look more like the gender I'm trying to present as? I'm so upset because I really am not passing. And it's not that they're feeling better about themselves. It's just that they keep trying harder and harder to achieve a goal that they cannot achieve. Once a child is socially transitioned, they're more likely to persist with their gender dysphoric feelings because, again, they're being encouraged to believe there's something wrong with them. And once a child socially transitions, they're far more likely to medically transition. And this is huge. So first of all, the idea of transitioning is based on exaggerated, outdated, and regressive stereotypes of what gender is. So they use something like this. This is the left. It's so confusing. They're using Barbie to suggest what it means to be a female and G.I. Joe to suggest what it means to be a male. Isn't this exactly what they were trying to get away from? But now they're embracing this. So we have exaggerated stereotypes of what it means to be a woman. So according to this, I'm not a woman because I don't dress like Barbie. Social transitioning also includes tuckers and packers. And I actually had pictures in there and was requested not to have them because there might be children around. I do have them in my backpack. I brought them with me so that you could see them. I was very uncomfortable going through security at the airport. But basically, tucking is a way to cover up the genitalia so that it presents as female. And they have some very extensive tucking and devices that make it look like they're female. And a packer is basically a fake penis that you can put in your child's panties. The one that I have is marketed to children under 5. Breast binding is also encouraged to women. And one of the concerns, I actually bought a breast binder too because I wanted to see what it was like. And these are the concerns with breast binding. They have a difficult time breathing. So you're encouraging girls to bind their breasts and then they have a difficult time breathing. They have back problems, tissue damage. They can fracture their ribs and get blood clots. And one of the things that when I had the binder on that I thought of is that children who are autistic like compression. So it's very possible that girls who are autistic get a breast binder and it makes them feel better. And it's not because they're a boy, it's because they're autistic. And that compression helps them feel better. Children who socially transition are far more likely to medically transition. If the Equality Act is passed, therapists will have to affirm children's gender dysphoria. In many states, they already are legally obliged to do so. In Utah, they're trying to make this legal. This would mean that a therapist would have to affirm. They would have to go along with a child's desire to medically transition. There would be no gatekeepers to stop a child from moving forward with medically transitioning, and this is deeply concerning. In addition to the fact that a therapist would be required to affirm a child's self-hatred. A therapist would be required to affirm the incorrect perception a child has that they're the opposite sex. So medically transitioning includes puberty blockers as early as 8 years old, cross-gender hormones now in a study in Los Angeles as early as 8 years old, and surgery. Puberty blockers often are sold as a way to put a pause on puberty. And they are most definitely more invasive than just putting a pause. There really is no way to pause puberty. It's a natural process, and there's no way to stop it except for doing something rather serious. So puberty blockers are experimental. They are not certified by the FDA for use in gender dysphoria, nor by the American Medical Association. The long-term effects of puberty blockers aren't known because they've never been used in this way. These children are guinea pigs. So we really don't know what the long-term effects of giving children this are going to be. We do know that there's problems with developmental, cognitive development and bone development, and I'm supposing there's going to be a whole host of other problems. We also have discovered there's an increase in self-harm among children who are given puberty blockers. Probably because we're encouraging them to believe there's something wrong with themselves. There's also a shockingly high rate of persistence. So this isn't a pause, because in England they've found that 100% of children who are put on puberty blockers go on to medically transition. This is not a pause. This is a pathway towards medically transitioning. Cross-gender hormones result in a redistribution of fat, depending on which gender you're taking. So if girls are taking testosterone, their fat will move away from their breasts and their thighs, and they'll lose a lot of fat. It changes their hair growth, their sex drive. It causes mood swings and depression. So we're treating one dysfunction and increasing that dysfunction by giving them medications that are going to cause mood swings and depression. There are permanent changes to genitalia and often infertility. And the long-term effects of cross-gender hormones in children, as I said, we don't know. These children are guinea pigs. Cross-gender surgeries in males involve vocal cord surgery. They actually go in and they will scrape the vocal cords so that their voices become higher. They get breast implants, facial feminization surgery, which involves chiseling away of the bones in the forehead and the cheeks and the chin, body hair removal, and vaginoplasty, basically creating a vagina out of the penis. And these procedures are expensive. They have lots of complications, and they're basically causing a functional body to become dysfunctional. Cross-gender surgery in females, and this is a shocking picture. Basically, this is a gender clinic in California that's getting funded by the National Science Foundation to do this kind of research. This woman says it's okay to cut off a girl's breasts because if you want larger breasts in your life, at a later point in your life, you can go and get them. This is their attitude. You can amputate a girl's breasts, and if she changes her mind, it's okay because she can go and get them. This is a doctor who is completely out of touch with reality, who is interacting with children. Incidentally, she's also married to a female who identifies as a male, who is one of the counselors in her clinic. This is a horrible picture, but it's an example of phalloplasty, which is basically when they take a section of the flesh from the forearm and create a pseudopenis. Often very dysfunctional, often causes lifelong side complications. The penis itself obviously is not a penis and not functional. These are also incredibly expensive, and insurance companies are being compelled to pay for them. And so we have women who have had mastectomies as a result of breast cancer who cannot get reconstructive surgery, whereas people with gender dysphoria are getting their surgeries covered, their cosmetic elective surgeries covered by Medicaid and insurance companies. And again, if the Equality Act is passed, insurance companies will be compelled to cover these procedures.
Here's the other thing about chest surgery. If you want breasts at a later point in your life, you can go and get them.
This is the attitude. There's also emotional blackmail, and this is incredibly frustrating because they tell parents if they don't allow their children to transition, their children will kill themselves. They say things like, what is worse, accepting your child's gender identity or burying them because you couldn't? So we have parents who are in a terrible position. They can either support their child, damaging their body, not causing emotional problems, or they can feel like they're going to be guilty if their children kill themselves. And there's no other situation where we say the parents are responsible for the suicide of their children. In fact, we got away from blaming mothers for autism. And now the left, the ones who try to support mothers and say it's not a mother's fault if a child has a mental illness, are blaming parents if their children kill themselves. And this is incredibly frustrating because then parents feel like they have to transition their child. They're actively undermining parents, as Maria said. They say things like, we will be your family. If your parents don't support you, we will be your family. And when I say support, I'm not talking about a parent who says, I love you no matter what. They're saying if your parent does not 100% use your chosen name, use your preferred pronouns, and do whatever you want to do in order to affirm yourself, that they're not supportive. And so they are undermining parents. In schools, teachers are told that if a child is transgender and their parents don't support it, the teacher can allow them to transition during school and keep that information from the parents. We also have people like me and Maria vilified. They call us TERFs, which is kind of ironic because I don't think Maria or I are radical feminists. But they basically say that anybody who does not believe that a transgender male is the same, or a transgender woman is the same as a woman, is a TERF, which is it's basically equivalent to being a Nazi. And then they say we should kill all Nazis. So basically, they're advocating violence against women like Maria and I. And I'm assuming you've gotten threats. I've gotten them. And it's basically because we're not supporting their language. Most kids who are trans are not trans. As I said earlier, this is a condition that generally resolves itself. WPATH is the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. They are an incredibly pro-trans advocacy group, and even they admit that of all the children who are trans as children, only 6 to 23% will persist into adulthood. And yet, they're encouraging parents and doctors to medically transition these children, even though we know that the majority of these children will have that gender dysphoria resolved. So up to 94% of children who identify as trans are not. They have gender dysphoria. They have a mental health issue that can be resolved either with gentle, watchful, or waiting, or in my case, with some simple interventions that trans activists want to prevent. Human Rights Campaign admits the truth is we don't really know whether a child who is gender nonconforming in childhood is going to go on and have a trans identity in adolescence or adulthood. So they know that what they're saying isn't true, and yet they keep telling people that their child will kill themselves if they're not allowed to transition. This might seem like a joke. A lot of people, when I posted this on Facebook, thought it was a joke. But our friend Rusty is quite serious. He enjoys going into women's bathrooms because he's had his sex legally changed in Oregon from male to female. He has legal permission to go into any woman's space, and he gets a kick out of it. He likes scaring women, and he posts about it. So basically, we're reaffirming to children that it's possible to be born in the wrong body, and we're telling people like this, predators, who enjoy making women and girls uncomfortable, they have free reign. So I asked myself, when this whole thing came up, when I got a letter from Equality Utah that said that they were trying to stop children from getting appropriate mental health services, as I explored that and realized that I would have transitioned in a heartbeat. If I were alive today and had the same issues, I would not be standing here as a woman. I would be standing here as a mutilated person with a beard and my breasts amputated and the inability to have children. And I am so thankful because I have the most amazing family. People often ask me about my gender dysphoria, and I still sometimes feel more like a guy than a girl because I love my phone number in a way that most women wouldn't, because it's got this beautiful pattern. And I still dress kind of funny, and I'm kind of geeky. But on the day that my daughter was born, and I held her, I realized I had the right body, and I loved it. And I can't imagine if I hadn't had her. So we need to do everything we can to prevent children from being sterilized before they're old enough to understand the implications. Gender dysphoric children, they deserve to have appropriate mental health services. They deserve to have the opportunity to learn to love themselves. They deserve functional bodies. And they deserve a chance to resolve or manage their gender dysphoria. So please, do everything you can to fight back against this transgender ideology. Thank you.